All right, so let's talk about React dynamic styling. And what we mean by this is that we would like to be able to use React, right? Be able to write functions or expressions, right? That can help us control how the screen looks like, right? That we would like to be able to apply styles and classes, right? And that paint the screen a particular color or background or font or sizing or whatnot, based on algorithms, right, that evaluate, how a screen should be, right, should look like, right. So we can programmatically create algorithms that can compute whether something should be displayed one way or another. So first, let's take a look at using classes, right. We'd like to be able to compute classes that we might want to apply, right. Now we want to maybe create an expression that can evaluate perhaps to one of these various classes. Sorry about that. These might be classes that we have written ourselves, right, that we define them, or these might be classes that are defined by some library like Bootstrap or Tailwind or whatnot, right? And they're very well defined, and we might want to programmatically choose that we want to display maybe something with this class or that other class, right? Or red or blue or yellow, depending on some rule or some algorithm. So let's create in Lab 3. Let's create a CSS, right, that contains these class definitions, right? So let's take a look at our lab 3, right? These are all the exercises that we worked on so far, right? And so let's create a classes.css. So notice this is a CSS file. So we're going to have in here CSS content, and indeed we do. Right? We have several classes that we're defining, right? Yellow, blue, red, green, black, and whatnot. Okay, and then we're going to import those classes. We're going to import them, and we're going to just apply them statically. Right? We'll apply them statically. And and then we'll go through several examples where we can dynamically choose the class that we want. Right? But first, let's take a look at doing it static. Right? Static example first. So we have classes.tsx, right? Oops, dot. .tsx. And so in here, let's paste that. And notice that it's importing our classes CSS style sheet, right? So it's importing this here. And then in there, right, we are declaring a couple of divs or 3 divs that have some text in them that yellow background, blue background, and red background. And we're applying these classes, right? We want the background yellow, this blue, and this red, and the foreground to be black, and some padding. Okay. So let's bring that into the Lab 3 family of exercises. So this will be our classes, and let's navigate to the labs. Let's go to labs and Lab 3. Right. And in Lab 3 at the bottom, there it is. We have these classes, which is just these simple 3 divs where we have applied the background yellow, blue, and red. So yellow, blue, and red. Okay. All right. So nothing new there, nothing earth-shattering. But the point of this exercise is to illustrate that the class name, right? That here, right now, we are applying the value to be a hard-coded string. Right? Notice that we have these strings, right? That they can't change, right? Because they're being assigned to a literal string. Right? But if instead we use an expression by using a curly bracket, we can use inside of that curly bracket an expression that must evaluate to a string, right? And this might be either a template string, like we illustrated in prior exercises, right? That can concatenate content or strings, right, and build a bigger string. And it can be dynamic, right? For instance, here we can insert a variable or a constant, and that constant can be, again, can be non-changing, or this could be some computed string based on some complex algorithm, going out to a server, right, to make sure that you're logged in or something, right? And depending on the result of that complex algorithm, then we can apply a particular color. So, but we want to illustrate, right, that if you have here a constant blue, right, we can build the class on the fly, right? So for instance, let's add this div here, and notice that there's dynamic blue background. There it is, dynamic blue background. So it's dynamic in the sense that the class is being computed, right, at runtime, right, depending on the value of that color, right? So it's a simple example illustrating the principle. Right? So let's take a look at another one. Here, instead, we're driving the styling based on some Boolean expression, right, that it's dangerous. And so here we are illustrating the fact that we can have more complex logic, to create the class name. So for instance, here we start off with a curly bracket because it's an expression. It's a string that we're going to dynamically compute, not hard-coded like we have here. Right, so it's an expression where we have a template string, right, that allows us to embed a combination of static content. So this is static, right? It allows us to have these break these into two lines without having to use concatenation characters like a plus sign or anything like that, right? And it allows us to, again, embed an expression, just like this one. This is an expression where the expression is trivial and it's just a constant. Or it could be an expression that perhaps it's a ternary expression, right, that evaluates a predicate on whether the expression is true or false, right? And then the whole expression either evaluates to the one or another outcome depending on whether the predicate is true or false. So in this case, the predicate is true. That means that this whole expression, right, evaluates to a red border, right? And that's why we have here rendering with a red border. Or, right, if it would have been false, right, it would have been rendered instead with a green, right? There it is. Okay, let's leave it at let's. What did I do? Let me save that. Let's change this to true. Right, it goes back to a red dangerous. Okay, all right. And all right, so that's just to illustrate, right, that we can use these class name as expression as opposed to hard-coded strings. All right, so let's take a look at HTML styles. As we've discussed in prior examples, right, we can use the styles or style attribute, right, in React components, right, to style a particular element, right, and it takes the syntax of a JSON object, right. So, for instance, here we are defining several JSON values, right, or JSON objects, right, that have this one have a property of color and then the value string black, right. Here we have another padding 10x, right, 10 pixels. Then here we are using a spreader to combine several classes, several properties, several CSS property into one single object, background blue, that declares a background color plus a foreground color of black plus some padding that is declared earlier. So you can combine several styles into ever more complex styles, right? So for instance, here, background red is combining not only a background static value, but you're also combining, right, foreground color of black plus some padding. And once you have these JSON objects, you can apply them to the using the style attribute. Either apply the objects directly, Like these are the objects are declared over here, right? BG blue, BG red, or you can use this funky little syntax of where you have these double curly brackets, right? So the outer curly brackets, like this over here, right, are used to declare that this is not a string, right? It's not static. Instead, what is in here is an expression. So this whole thing needs to evaluate. Actually, it needs to evaluate to an object, right? Which indeed it is, right? These are all objects, right? These are all objects declarations, right? They're literal objects, right? Or you can have, right inside of the expression, you can declare the object right there and then inline. So either an object that has been declared, and here we are referencing it, or we are inline declaring the object right inside of the style tag. So that's why you get this funky little syntax where you have two curly brackets. The outer one, again, is for the expression, and the inner one is because this is a JSON object. So let's create this just to illustrate. This is a styles component. So styles component, and let's first the first half over here, and then the second half. There we go. All right, so and then we can bring in import it in our lab3 screen. So this is styles, right? And there we go. So it's this one over here. Again, same as before, right? But instead of using classes, right, we are using the style attribute, right? So this first one, we are declaring the background color to be light yellow, foreground black, 10-inch padding, and then here we're using these constant objects, right, that are built, in terms of each other. Oh my goodness. Am I getting sick? Okay, so this was just a few examples of being able to calculate, right, through algorithms and templates and expressions and objects, data structures, how we can use these algorithms to build the look and feel of an element, right? Either using classes where you have dynamic classes, or using the style attribute. Okay, all right. All right, so let's talk about parameterized components, meaning we want to be able to create components that can take arguments. Like, for instance, it could be a component as simple as this that is an add component that can take two arguments, A and B, right? And then use those arguments to display some user interface, right? That is dynamic, that is different depending on the arguments that you pass. So for instance, this one simply displays a header of add, displays the value of A and B, right? And then displays the arithmetic addition of A and B, right? And you pass them in as arguments. Now notice the syntax here, that we are using curly brackets, right, as part of the parameter list. And that means that this is it's an object destructor operation, meaning that the add function here, the add functions, is expecting that we pass an object with attributes A and B, attributes or properties whose names are A and B. And then when we receive them, we're going to destruct the incoming object, and we're going to extract, the parameter, the object property A. We're going to assign it to a local constant A, right? And a property B in the incoming object is going to be destructed, and it's going to be assigned the value to a local constant B. Okay. So this is what it means, right? We are destructing whatever we're passing the object, right? And it's expected to be parameters A and B. Now, since this is a TypeScript, right? In addition here, we do need to have a declaration of the data type of the function, right? So here we have the function. This is parameter, but because of TypeScript, we have to add typing, right? Especially in functions, we have to say, well, we are expecting the structure of the object that is coming is that it'll be an object. That's what the curly bracket here means, right? We are expecting an object that has a property A and B, right? And that A and B are both numbers, number and number. Okay, so this is used for validation purposes, right? Making sure that when we do pass data to this function, right, that indeed is an object, and indeed it has these two properties, and they are of the correct data type. Now, once we are in the function, right, we can just treat A and B like we would any other variable, right, or constant. Here we just displaying that A is A, B is B, right, a break, and then displaying the arithmetic value, right. So let's illustrate this. Let's create an add component. Over here, let's see, we can create add.tsx, right? And let's copy this and let's paste that in there. Let's take a look at this, right? So yeah, so again, we are receiving A and B as an object. We are destructing it, and then we are displaying these one after another. Let's create maybe a break here. Let's create maybe another break. And then another break to display that A plus B is equal to A plus B. Okay. So all right. So let's include this in our lab 3. So here we have add, and so okay. Notice that it's broken, right? It says no. Wait a minute. Add is using this function, right? The function that we just created, this one right there, that function. That's what we are importing. There it is. So we are importing add. There it is. But it's expecting parameters A and B. Right? So that's why it's broken. It says you never passed me anything. Right? So the way we pass now, this is a function, right? Meaning we should be able to pass things maybe as a parameter, but because we are using this HTML type syntax, the way we actually pass arguments is through the syntax of using attribute value. So you can say A, and then the attribute value, and say maybe 2, and then add B with a value of 3, right? Notice that now it's not complaining anymore, right? Because it is receiving, what happens here is that when this gets transpiled, this gets converted into an object of whose properties A and B with values 2 and 3. Right? So indeed, right, add will receive an object with properties A and B, right, with the values of 2 and 3. So again, this is it's a feature of React that attributes get converted into objects, right, with the values that are assigned. Here we're using expressions, right, that we are passing as value the value 2, the number 2, and the number 3, as opposed to passing a string or anything like that, right? And we see here that indeed it displays as the A, the B, right, and A plus B equals 5. So it works as expected, right? So yeah, so this is a very common use of being able to parameterize attributes, right, that behave in a particular way. Well, we already saw an example of that when we played around with the to-do lists, right, that we were iterating over an array of to-dos, right, this one right here, right, and as we're iterating, each to-do was being passed as an argument down to the to-do item. Remember that? And the to-do item was receiving an attribute whose name was a to-do, right, that has this particular structure, right, of done, title, and status, right, and then inside we use it to render a to-do item, right? But we've seen that already, although we're formally covering the feature, right, of being able to pass parameters down to a component. Okay. Now we can also pass data to a component in the form of a child, in the body of the elements, right? So here's an example where we are, declaring a component square, right? And notice that in our illustration here, we were passing data to a component where we're passing it through attributes, right? So components have attributes just like this one. Div has the attribute ID, has the attribute class name, and here we created a brand new component of ours, and we created the name of the properties ourselves, right? A and B. This one, our IDs and class names presumably are based on some HTML standard and whatnot. Okay, but not only through attributes can we pass data to div. Not only can we configure div through the properties here, we can also configure an element. We can configure it not only through passing attributes in here, but also in the body. See that? The content lab 3 is actually an argument, right? It's data that is being sent over to the H3 element, and then what it does is that it takes that text and it displays that text in a particular size, right? That's what the 3 means, right? So if you have H1, H2, H3, H4, right, the text, right, would be kind of like an argument or parameter that is being used by H3 to display that content in various sizes. Well, we can do the same thing. We can create our own content, our own component, right, and pass it data through the body. So here's an example. Here's an example, right? We're going to create a little square component, right, that takes as argument in the body instead of an attribute, right? It'll take it within the opening and closing tags, so that we can pass it to the property, to the component that we built, square, and presumably what it'll do is that it'll take that value and do something with it. Maybe square the value. So it'll come back. This whole thing should render maybe 4 times 4. So how do we do that? How is it? So here we've illustrated that if you pass attributes, right, to a component, the way you receive them is through these curly brackets as an object with properties that you get to name, right? The names, you get to choose what the names of the properties you want, and then you have to adhere to you have to stick to those names of the properties. But what about here, right? Notice that we're not using any named property, right, or named attribute. Instead, that we have this body that is being consumed by the square, and it does something. So how do we get a hold of it, right? So the way the square component, what it does is that it can receive as a parameter the children, right? Anything that is inside of the body is considered to be a child, right? So just like in this header, right, the JavaScript text is the child of the headers. Also, if you look at this div here, right, this content over here are the children, right, of this surrounding div. So in the same sense, right, we can take that 4 is the child of the square component. So you can grab that. You can get a hold of that. You can read what the body is, what the children are, right, by receiving as a property, as an attribute, as an argument parameter, right? Using the keyword children. So children is going to represent the data, whatever is in the body, and so once you have it, right, you can convert it, make sure that it's the correct data type or whatever. By default, it's just a string, right? Actually, no, it's a type of React node. It's a node, and here we are converting it we're casting it to a number data type, because what we're going to do is that we're going to compute the arithmetic square of that number. So so we're going to replace, right? We're going to replace this square 4. It's going to be replaced. This whole thing is going to be replaced by whatever this returns, right? So I'm returning a span, right, whose inner value of the span is the square value of the number that we're reading from the child, okay, from the children. Okay, so let me illustrate that. Let me bring in square. Let's declare it here in the lab3, and it'll contain this code. So again, we're expecting a child, which is a type of React node, and then we cast it to a number so that we can compute the arithmetic multiplication of those two, and then from within lab3, right? We can grab that, right, and then embed it in here. Let's see. Oops. There we go. And we need to import square. Import square. There we go. There we go. So notice that it comes back with 16. So it's square of 4 is 16. And we can have several of these. We can have maybe another break here. We can say the square of 8. So then it's 64. See that? And you can even embed them and as part of an inline. So you can say, square of 4, right? 16. And here, square of 8 is square of 8. Make sense? All right. All right. So let's take a little more complex version of the same thing. Let's say we want to create a component that formats the content, right? Maybe it highlights it, right? Maybe highlights it into some color, like yellow or something. Just like H3, right? What does H3 do? Right? It takes some text and then it formats it, giving it some font size, maybe font weight, right? A particular font or whatever, right? So it's an element, it's a tag that formats the child content, so that it looks a particular way. So let's do that ourselves. Let's create one that's called highlight, and like the name suggests, right, whatever text you give it is going to highlight it, right? It's going to change its background color. So how do we implement that? Well, here's the highlight, right? It's going to take whatever content you give it, right? And what it's going to do is that it's going to surround it with a span, right? And it's going to give it a style. It's going to change its background color to be yellow, and it's going to maybe change the foreground color to be red, and then all surrounding the children that the content that you gave it. So it could highlight not only just plain text, but really anything, right? Because it will surround whatever content you want to highlight. Right, so let's implement it. So let's see, highlight.tsx. Let's add it right here. There we go. And let's copy that, paste that in there. All right, so we have that. And now let's use it, right, in the lab3 to highlight this paragraph. All right, so let's go to lab3 here and maybe put it at the bottom. Let's save that. Oops, we need to import the highlight. Import. There we go. So there it is. So it's highlighted, and you can highlight anything you want. Maybe you can highlight this square of 4. Right? We can do highlight, right, and then surround the square of 4. So notice that square of 4 is now highlighted. Right? So anything that you want to highlight, you can just surround with highlight, and then it applies that style wherever you want it. Make sense? All right. So another way that you can parameterize a component is by passing data as part of the URL, right? And so, for instance, we can use the use location hook, right, React hook, to be able to interact with the URL, right, that you have in a browser. So for instance, this URL, right? So So we can encode data as part of the URL, and so that based on that URL, right, we can read data in there, and so that the content will display one way or another based on what is in the URL, so that we can pass in parameters, right? We can read that and then customize the look and feel or the behavior of the user interface based on whatever we pass there as arguments, right? So it's so one particular way which is useful is in the styling, for instance, the these links, right? The table of contents. So let's open up the table of contents. There it is. So right now the table of contents is just UL. We can change this to be styled as a pill, right? As bootstrap pills. So this would be nav, and then nav pills. Okay, so that converts it into inline like that, and then these can be, we can add classes such as let me take them. Remember, li on the hyperlink. Yeah, on the hyperlinks would be nav link. Yeah, so nav link, so nav link like that, and then we can apply this to all of them. These would be all nav links, all nav links. Now, one of them should be highlighted. So for instance, since we are at lab 3, this should be highlighted. So link 3 should be active. So this would be active. All right, so notice that this gives us the extra information that that's where we are, right? And ideally, as we click through this, right, we should be able to take a look at the let's go back to the labs. We can take a look at the this information up here, right, and then highlight the correct values, right? So we can use we can use a hook called use location that is part of the React router that is going to give us access to the URL, the location, right? The URL is the location of the screen that you're looking at, right? So let's import that. So we'll say use location. There we go. Right, and we are going to store it here in location equal. Right, and let's display the value of the location so that we can have an idea of what is it that it contains. Right. So first of all, let's create an outer container so we can display the location. Right. So let's display the location. Let's see. Let's use JSON stringify location so we can see what it looks like. Okay, there it is. So it looks what's inside of the location. I notice that it has a property path name, another one search, and then the hash, the state, and the key. All right, so those are all data that is in there. Maybe we can look at it a little easier to read. We can put it inside of a pre here, like that. Okay, and then maybe we can add some tabs here. So null and 2 or 4. So there it is. So that's what it contains: path name, search, hash, state, and key. So this is the object in location. And so, but here what we are pretty interested mostly is this right here. It's basically everything that is after the hash. See that? Right? Labs 3. And so we can extract the path name because it's the only part that we really care about. Right? So we can extract that maybe using destruct, right? So we can destruct and extract the path name, and so we can display the path name over here. So let's do path name. Let's see what it looks like. There it is. So the path name is labs 3. Okay. So based on the value of path name, we could write logic over here, right, in these class names, and then apply active programmatically based on the logic, based on that path name, right? So what we could do here is that we can convert this into an expression, right? So that instead of being hard-coded strings, this could be a like this, like that, right? So now we can embed some logic in here. So for instance, instead of this always being active, it should only be active, right? If the path name includes, right, the string lab3, right? So we can say, okay, does it include that? If so, then add the active, right? Or if not, then don't do anything. All right, there it is. So it worked. We didn't do anything. We didn't see any change. But let's copy this class name and let me illustrate it to other. But well, at least we should be able to see that if I go to lab 2, notice that it doesn't highlight, right? Because now lab 3 is not contained in here, right? But if I go back to lab 3, it highlights. See that? Before it was always highlighted no matter where I went, okay? But now it only highlights when this has lab 3. See that? So I can do the same technique and apply it to lab 2. So let's paste the class name like that. And we'll say, we'll only change this to lab 2, right? So lab 2 only will highlight, right, if this contains lab 2. So click on that. There it is. See that? So it contains lab 2 or lab 3. I can highlight either one. And one more. Let's do one more. Let's copy that and let's put it here in lab 1, right? And change this to lab 1. Okay. And again, now lab 1 will highlight, lab 2 and lab 3. Obviously, if it goes to Canvas, there's nothing to highlight. Now we can use the same technique to highlight these various tabs over here, right? So that if we sign in, right, and we go to the dashboard, we would highlight the dashboard. We would use the same kind of technique, right? We would take a look at the location, and based on that location, we would highlight, apply the various classes to one or the other, right, to change the background and foreground and whatnot. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Now we don't need this path name, right? We don't need this pre. Let's remove that. That was only for for debugging purposes. Okay. Let's take a look at another example, right? Where we'll create another component like we did earlier that adds numbers, but this time around, right, it's going to try and grab the values from the URL, not from the not from the as arguments, right, that are being passed around, right? So let's copy that and let's create a new component in here. Let's see that, and let's copy the content and let's paste that in there like that. Okay, so what it's doing here is that notice that we're using the same library as the earlier example. Right? The earlier example was using location, use location from React Router DOM, right? Use location. Use locations gives you access to the URL, a whole bunch of information about the URL. Well, there's another version of this, right, called use params, right? It's a little more sophisticated, right? And it's useful when you want to have more control over the structure of this URL, right? Where instead of using the string, right, you can break up the URL into pieces, right? And you can name each one of the paths. You can say that this is the first path element, the second path element, so on and so forth. You can name them. You can give them specific names, and then once you name them, you can ask, okay, well, the parameter that the path element that I called A, well, I want to know what the value is, right? And the path element that I called B, right? Well, I want to know what the value is, right? And so use params again. Returns an object, and then you can destruct the object, right? And extract the pieces that you want. So let's take a look at this. So this is a we're going to. So what we're going to do is that this path parameters component, right, is going to live inside a route, right? So meaning it will only render if the path has the following structure, right? That it contains. It starts with add, right, and it ends with two values that don't have any particular value, right? Notice the colon. Colon means that this is I am naming this spot, this path, this path element over here. I'm calling it A, and this path element I'm calling it B, right? And they could be different values, right? And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a couple of hyperlinks, right? That are going to have they're going to have the add. They're going to pattern match this. They're going to pattern match it. And then we're going to use different values for A and B. So if you click on this in this hyperlink, then we'll have add 1 and 2. So A and B will be 1 and 2. If you click on this other one, right, it'll be add 3, 4. So that A will be 3 and B will be 4. And then the add parameter add path parameter is going to be able to retrieve the values by name. So that in one case A will be 1 and B will be 2. In another case A will be 3 and B will be 4. Right? It'll display. We'll parse it into integers and calculate the arithmetic addition. Okay. All right, so let's copy this. This will be path parameters. Right, oops, copy. And so let's create it over here. And let's copy this here. And what we're doing is that we're creating these hyperlinks that when we click, they're going to the base URL as we are in lab 3, right? When we click on one or the other, it's just going to add to lab 3. It's going to add, add 1, 2, 3, or add 3, 4, 3 and 4. And so this only renders if the URL matches, right? Matches, and it looks like that. It looks like lab 3, add 1, 2, add 3, 4. If it doesn't match, it's not going to render. Okay, so this only the add path parameter only renders if it matches, right? But the hyperlinks don't. The hyperlinks always render, as part of the lab 3. Let's add this path parameters to lab 3 at the bottom. Right. So at the bottom of lab 3, we are going to add path parameters. Path parameters. There it is. We'll need to import it. Okay, so there it is. Notice that path parameters is indeed only rendering these two links. All right, let me make this a little smaller. It's rendering these two links. Let me add a little bit of space down below so that we can see. Here we can scroll a little bit. So notice that this is not rendering because the URL does not match. Right, the URL is if it had add at the end and then two values in the path, then right path parameters would render. Otherwise, it doesn't. So let's see. So when I click on this, if I hover, notice that it wants to go to /labs/lab3/add/1/2. So it's going to add here at the bed. It's going to concatenate here, add 1 and 2, and then it's going to pattern match. It's going to match this, and it's going to add path parameter is going to parse A and B like that. It's going to parse A and B, right? And it's going to print out the values of A and B, and then it's going to compute the arithmetic addition. So let's do that. Let's click on 1, 2. Boom, there it is. So add path parameter, and it's rendering 1 and 2, and then the addition of 1 and 2, which is 3. So it's parsing. Notice it's rather. So notice that it's add 1, 2, right? That matches this pattern, this path pattern. Right now it renders. This renders because it matches this, right? And so we're parsing the values of A and B, which is 1 and 2, and then we're calculating, right? We're displaying 1, we're displaying 2, and then the addition of A and B right, parsed as integers. Okay, and if we click on 3, 4, right, notice that it parses the 3, parses the 4, right, and it computes the arithmetic addition. And then I can go back and forth between the two, right, and then up here the URL is changing. So if I click on this, is add 1, 2. If I click on that, is add 3, 4. So yeah, so this is one way that screens or components can pass data, embedded as part of the path, right? And this is going to be very important when we go to the canvas, right, and we navigate to the dashboard, right, and so when we click on the particular course, right, we're going to encode the ID of the course, right, as part of the path, and what the course's screen is going to do, or the module or the home screen, what's going to do is that it's going to parse that ID. And based on that ID, it'll know that it has to display the content for one course or another course, depending on the ID, right? So if I go to another one, it'll be a different ID, and it'll display a different content, different set of modules. Make sense? So that skill that we just practiced on will be very important, right, to be able to implement features such as different content from different IDs. Okay, all right. Right, so a word on debugging. So it's very important that you're aware that as you're working through your labs and implementing your web application, that you can inspect your inspector, right? I'm going to put it at the bottom, right? It's a full-blown development tool, right? That not only does it provide content for your static uh, um, content, right? Your HTML, your CSS, right? But it also gives you access to source code, right? It gives you access to all your classes, all your functions, all your variables, right? All your constants, and you can step through the code, right? So if you let's see, where is it? Let me just. Okay, here you have the file system is right there, right? And it gives you access to your file system. And you can take a look at the source code, right? So for instance, in this example, you're going to add path parameters. It'll be available under the labs, under lab 3, add path parameters. You can click on that, and there it is, right? So this is the source code, right, that we are working on. And you can put breakpoints. So for instance, you can put a breakpoint. Why is it not letting me put a breakpoint? Oh, there it is. So there's a breakpoint there, or over here, for instance, so that if you refresh, right, it runs. Well, let's go to the lab actually. Let's go to the lab. Go to the lab. Let's go to lab 3, right? And let's click on this. So if I click on it, notice it runs. Right now, it's being evaluated, and you can hover, right, over the values of A and B. See that? So that you can make sure that if something is not behaving the way you wanted it, right, you can step through the code, right, and validate that it's behaving as you would expect, right? You can take a look at the variables. You can put breakpoints. You can put watch statements, right? So it's a full-blown development environment. It's very, very important. Notice it has watches. It has all the local variables are declared, right? All you have a call stack, right? If you have different functions that you are calling each other and whatnot, right? So definitely, it's a very important tool that you need to be aware of and feel confident that you can use this tool to do full-blown development. Okay, right. So definitely take a look at this, right, and and practice its use. Right.